On a storm-ravaged shore where the sea swallows secrets and fishermen live forgotten lives, a lonely man pulls a woman from the waves, half drowned, trembling and running from more than just the tide. Arvin, a widowed fisherman hiding from his own ghosts, never imagined his world would be shattered by a stranger with ocean-deep eyes and a voice full of silence. But Alina isn't just any runaway. She's a billionaire's bride, promised to a man with more power than conscience. And she'd rather risk death in the sea than a life in his cage. As the storm outside settles, another bruise between them, an unexpected intimacy, fragile and forbidden. But shadows don't stay buried. The man she fled sends hunters to find her, and soon the peaceful coast becomes a battleground of loyalty, love, and survival. From moonlit fishing trips to desperate escapes, from whispered truths to a kiss on a deserted island, the sea. Between us is a tale of two broken souls finding freedom in each other until the world comes crashing back in. Will love be their anchor, or will the tides of power pull them apart forever? Stay with us, because some rescues don't end at the shore. They begin there. The sea never stopped talking. It whispered through the wind, sighed against the rocks, and roared when the sky lost its temper. But on most mornings, it simply murmured to itself, as if mulling over secrets it had no intention of sharing. And on one such morning, under the pale breath of dawn, Arvin stood on the edge of the weather-worn dock, letting the chill salt air sting his face. His hands, thick and calloused from years of labor, moved methodically as he prepped his small fishing boat, the Wren. She was old, stubborn, and weathered, much like her owner. Arvin had named her after a bird his late wife once loved, back when life still felt like something that could bloom. The village of Karaya was barely more than a pinprick on the coastal map, just a line of shingled rooftops and creaking boats, a place where strangers rarely came and stories died with their tellers. Arvin liked it that way. Out here, no one asked questions. No one poked at the wounds that hadn't healed, or the eyes that looked away when laughter was too loud. He hadn't spoken to anyone beyond simple greetings in months. That suited him just fine. Routine was his religion. Cast the nets, mend the ropes, salt the catch, fix the roof, fix the silence, repeat. But that morning, something felt off. It wasn't the sky, though it wore a dull gray robe that threatened a storm. Nor was it the sea, though it had begun to pulse with a restless rhythm, the kind that always seemed to know trouble before men did. It was the birds. They weren't singing. Arvin paused, listening to the thick hush, pressing in around him. No gulls, no chirps, just the low slosh of tide licking at the posts. Then he saw it, out near the jagged break of rocks that jutted like broken teeth from the water's edge. A splash. Not the usual kind. Not a fish. A hand. His breath caught in his chest. He blinked, thinking it a trick of light. But it came again, fingers flailing weakly before vanishing beneath the surf. Damn it! He dropped the net in his hands and ran. Adrenaline turned his aging legs into machines. He leapt from dock to skiff, yanking the engine cord hard enough to tear it. The motor sputtered awake just as another splash appeared. Farther out now, the sea was stealing her. By the time he reached her, she was limp, barely clinging to a shard of wood. A tattered dress, once velvet, clung to her like seaweed. Her hair fanned out in dark waves, tangling with salt and foam. Arvin leaned over the side and pulled her in. She was heavier than she looked. Her skin was ice, her lips were blue, but she was breathing. He didn't speak, just wrapped her in an old blanket, pushed the throttle, and sped back to shore. Back at the shack that served as his home, he laid her on the cot beside the fire. He stripped off the soaked dress with as much care as decency allowed, wrapping her in dry layers, one after another. She didn't stir, not even when he touched her wrist to find a pulse, steady but faint. A bruise marked the curve of her ribs. Her hands bore blisters, fresh ones, like she'd been rowing or clinging to something for too long. Arvin stared at her face. Not local. Skin is too smooth. Nails once manicured. She didn't belong here. Who was she? What was she running from? He had every reason to turn her over to the authorities. But the moment he looked into her face, unguarded, vulnerable, etched with a kind of exhaustion that no sea could wash away, he knew he wouldn't. Arvin sat beside the fire, rubbing his hands together, trying to ignore the storm gathering beyond the windows. Thunder rolled far away, a slow drumbeat of something looming. The sea had delivered her like a secret, and secrets had a way of turning lives inside out. He didn't know it yet, but the moment she opened her eyes, neither of them would ever be the same again. The storm didn't wait for permission. By the time Arvin finished drying the stranger's skin and tucking her beside the fire, the wind had begun howling through the slats of his wooden shack like an angry spirit. The sea, visible through the fogged window, had turned from soft whispers to violent slaps. He knew the signs. This wasn't a passing squall. It was going to be a long, punishing night. The fire cracked and spit embers as he stoked it higher, laying another log across the flame. He glanced back at her. She hadn't moved. Her breathing was steady but shallow, lips parted slightly as if whispering dreams or nightmares. He should have radioed the harbor master, should have reported her to the Coast Patrol. Instead, he made soup. Whatever instincts told him to keep her hidden were louder than the rules he used to live by. He brought a bowl of steaming broth to her side, but she didn't stir, not even a flicker. Her face, now cleaned of salt and grit, showed delicate features framed by dark waves of hair. She looked young, but not naive. There were lines of worry creasing her brow, even in unconsciousness. Thunder cracked so close the walls trembled. Rain began lashing the roof like fists. Arvin moved fast, bracing the shutters and sealing the door with old rope and iron hooks. The ocean had moods, and tonight it was drunk on fury. Hours passed. He kept glancing over at her as if she might vanish again. When the clock hit midnight, her fingers twitched. He sat up straight. She murmured something unintelligible, then whimpered, a sound that sliced through his ribs like fishbone. Then with a gasp, she bolted upright. "Easy," Arvin said, voice low but firm, hands open. "You're safe." Her eyes locked onto his. Wild, frantic, she scanned the room, chest heaving like a trapped animal. Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, cracked with fear and salt. "Karaya Coast," he said. "You washed ashore. I pulled you in." She wrapped the blanket tighter around her, shrinking from his gaze. "How long?" "A few hours," he replied. "Storm's still on. You're lucky to be alive." She didn't answer, just stared into the fire as if trying to remember who she was or forget what she'd done. "Got a name?" he asked more gently. She paused, her lips parted, then closed. After a long silence, she whispered, "Alina." It sounded like the truth, but too practiced. He knew a half lie when he heard one. Still, he nodded. "I'm Arvin," he said. "This is my home. You're welcome to stay until the sea calms." Another silence. Rain hammered the roof above. Then she whispered almost too softly to hear, "Thank you." Alina didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Arvin. He could hear her shifting on the cot, the occasional rustle of blankets as she adjusted, as though trying to find comfort in a world that had none left to offer. He stayed seated in the corner, watching the fire, letting his mind drift through the dangerous questions piling up like driftwood. What kind of woman ends up alone in the sea during a storm? Who was she running from? And how far would they go to find her? When the first light broke through the gray sky, weak and watery, Arvin stood and poured 2 mugs of hot tea. He brought one to her without a word. She accepted it, still quiet, still wrapped in the oversized blanket like it was armor. "Where did you come from?" he asked finally. She looked down at her tea. "Far away." "Not helpful. I could call the authorities," he said calmly. "Coast Patrol can trace where you fell overboard." "I don't want them called." Her eyes snapped up, sharp now. "Please." Her voice was full of something deeper than fear, desperation. She wasn't just lost, she was hiding. He studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right, you don't want to talk, I won't force it, but don't lie to me." Alina's fingers curled tighter around the mug. "I'm not lying, I just can't say." Arvin turned back to the stove. "For now, you need rest. Your hands are blistered, feet too. Looks like you fought the sea." Her gaze flickered. "I did." She was out there for a long time, longer than most would have lasted. He saw the fresh cuts on her arms like she'd scrambled over sharp rocks. This wasn't some pampered socialite swept off her yacht. This was a woman running for her life. But from what or who? By noon, the storm had calmed. Arvin stepped out briefly to check the traps along the dock and found the fishing lines tangled, seaweed choked. He'd have to retie the nets. More work. He welcomed it. It kept his hands moving and his thoughts from wandering into dangerous territory. When he returned, Alina was standing by the fire, still wrapped in the blanket, but now on her feet. She flinched as the door creaked open, her entire body tensing. "You shouldn't be up," he said. "I'm fine." Her voice was flat, but her trembling legs said otherwise. He offered her a slice of dried fish and a thick heel of bread. She hesitated, then took both, sitting slowly. Her eyes darted toward the door. "You're safe here," he said quietly. Alina stared into the fire. No one's safe anywhere. Over the next 2 days, Arvin watched her with the quiet observance of a man used to reading the sea's moods. Alina was no different. She had tides of silence, waves of nervous energy, and the storm of whatever haunted her never seemed far from the surface. She never touched the radio, never asked to go into town, but she did help. She swept the floors without being asked, folded nets, cleaned fish with clumsy fingers that gradually found their rhythm. There was something honest in her effort, like she needed to prove she wasn't a burden. On the 3rd morning, Arvin caught her staring out toward the horizon, lips moving silently. "Praying?" he asked. "Talking to the sea," she said, turning slowly. "It listens better than people do." He gave a faint chuckle. "Not always. Sometimes it just takes—" Her expression softened. "But you still go out every day." "I have to. You respect the sea, but you can't let it scare you too much." Alina nodded. Then, almost reluctantly, she said, "The man I was supposed to marry, he didn't believe in listening." Arvin raised a brow but said nothing. She seemed to realize she'd said too much. "Sorry." He shook his head. "No need. But you should know, people come through here sometimes. Outsiders. If someone starts asking around, it's better I know what I'm protecting." Alina met his gaze for a long, tense moment. "I was being married off," she said finally, "to someone powerful, dangerous. I didn't have a choice, so I ran." "Arranged marriage?" She nodded. Arvin leaned back. "And you ended up in my bay, alone in the middle of a storm." "I jumped," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "off a yacht. Thought I'd drown." He didn't ask more, but now he understood the mark on her wrist, a bruise shaped like control, and the distance in her eyes. That was survival. After her confession, something shifted between them. The silence became less like a wall and more like a shared language. Alina stayed in the shack, but no longer curled in corners like a ghost. She walked with more confidence. Her voice, still quiet, carried less tremble. She began asking about the fish, the traps, the tides, and Arvin, used to solitude, found himself answering. He taught her how to cast a net properly, how to gut a catch without wasting meat, how to watch for storm patterns in the clouds before the weather turned. One evening, while repairing a net together, she asked, "What brought you here?" He paused. "A woman." "Your wife?" He nodded. "She died 4 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry." "She used to say the sea was her peace, so I came here after she passed. Stayed because I didn't know where else to go." Alina stared out toward the water. "We're both hiding from ghosts, then?" "Maybe." That night, Arvin found himself watching her sleep, not in fear, but in wonder. This woman who had fought the sea with bleeding hands, who had risked everything for freedom, she was changing his world. And whether he liked it or not, she was becoming part of it. The name never came. Even as Alina began to smile at the sound of gulls, to hum quietly while mending nets, to ask Arvin about how the fish changed with the season, there was one thing she never gave him: her last name. It hung in the air like a question left too long unanswered, and though Arvin tried not to press her, it itched at the edge of his instincts. You didn't grow up around salt and storms without learning when something was off. "Everyone's got a full name," he said one morning, casually, as they worked on gutting a long silver fish. "Not everyone wants to keep it," she replied just as easily. Fair enough. Still, it bothered him more than he let on. It wasn't about curiosity, it was about danger. If she was truly running from someone powerful, and every day made it clearer that she was, then not knowing meant he couldn't protect her properly. That night, as they sat by the fire, the topic crept up again. "Alina, what?" he asked, handing her a tin mug of warm cider. She hesitated. "It's safer if you don't know." "For who?" "For you," she said, meeting his gaze. The words stopped him cold. There was something terrifyingly sincere in the way she said it, as if her name carried a curse, as if just speaking it aloud could summon something, or someone. "Is it a name I'd recognize?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her face to the firelight, shadows dancing across her features. "The man I was supposed to marry isn't used to being told no. He's not the kind of man who lets things go." "Billionaire?" Arvin guessed, half joking. Alina didn't smile. He leaned forward slightly. Why'd your family agree to it? She gave a hollow laugh. Because money solves things. Because a strategic alliance is more valuable than a daughter's happiness. Arvin's jaw tightened. And you had no say. I was a number on a balance sheet, she said. Collateral for a business merger. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Alina glanced toward the door. If they find me, they'll try to take me back. You won't go, he said firmly. Her voice trembled. You can't stop them. I've stopped worse. She looked at him like she wanted to believe that, desperately. But trust didn't come easy to someone who'd been bartered like a piece of land. Later, when Arvin stepped outside for air, he found himself staring into the endless Black Sea. Somewhere out there, Alina's past was hunting her, and now, by sheltering her, it was hunting him too. Still, he didn't regret it. Not yet. In a penthouse suite high above the skyline of another world entirely, Lucas Margrave tapped a polished finger against a photo. A grainy, zoomed-in image of a woman wrapped in blankets on a fishing dock. She was barely visible, face shadowed, but he knew. She's alive, he said coldly. Across from him, a nervous private investigator adjusted his tie. Looks like she washed ashore somewhere along the Karaya coast. Lucas exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. I told her father this would happen. You give a girl too much leash, she runs. She jumped off the yacht, the investigator added, hesitantly. She defied me. Lucas stood, towering, his voice now steel. I will not be humiliated by some entitled little brat with delusions of freedom. Find her. I don't care how remote the village is. I want her back in my custody, now. The investigator nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Lucas turned toward the wall of glass overlooking the city. Rain traced soft patterns across the pane. His reflection stared back at him. Handsome, sharp-suited, and cruel. He had wealth that could move governments, charm that disarmed investors, and an ego that had never been challenged. Until her. He remembered the way she looked at him the night before the wedding. Eyes like a trapped animal. How dare she run? How dare she think she could escape him? She was his. He'd paid for her, and no one, especially not some nameless fisherman, was going to get in the way of what was his. He picked up his phone and dialed. Get the boat, get the men, and bring me my bride. The day Alina vanished was supposed to be the most photographed moment of her life. The dress had cost more than some people earned in a decade. Custom-designed lace and Swarovski crystal detailing fitted over a silk corset that made it hard to breathe, even before the anxiety set in. Cameras were already outside the yacht, waiting. Reporters, society influencers, investors. The marriage of Alina Devereaux, the only daughter of tech magnate Edmund Devereaux, to Lucas Margrave, wasn't just a union. It was a transaction. She stood at the mirror staring at the girl who stared back. She looked beautiful, sculpted into someone else's dream, but her eyes were haunted. She had tried everything, begging her father, running to her mother's grave for answers, even faking illness. But none of it worked. Her father's empire was in free fall, and Lucas was the lifeline. She was the price. So when the yacht's engines began humming and the ceremony music rehearsals played through the decks, she made her move. She had hidden the emergency raft the night before, a leftover piece of equipment from a forgotten maintenance check. She'd memorized the security routines, bribed a cleaner to look the other way, and timed it all to the second. When the violinist began tuning up on the upper deck, she was already lowering the raft into the water. She didn't think. She didn't pray. She jumped. The sea had been calm at first, like it was helping her. But as the miles stretched and the hours bled into the deep blue nothing, the wind turned. A storm swelled fast and unrelenting. The raft flipped. She clung to a wooden crate from the galley. Then everything was waves, cold, black, endless. Until Arvin, she had no idea how long she drifted, no memory of being pulled from the water. But she remembered the moment before she passed out, hands gripping hers, human warmth against the icy fury of the sea. Now, as she stood beside the fisherman's hearth, helping peel potatoes for stew, that memory kept replaying in her mind. "Why now?" Arvin asked softly. "Why not run sooner?" Alina looked up at him. "Because I didn't think I could. Until the night before the wedding, I looked at myself in that dress and realized I was already dead." Karaya village rarely saw newcomers, so when a man in polished shoes stepped off a private cruiser 3 days after the storm, people noticed. He wore a tailored coat too fine for the weather, sunglasses even under clouded skies. He asked questions too. "Has anyone seen a young woman, dark hair, small build, maybe injured?" He flashed photos to dockhands, offered money with each conversation. Some shrugged him off. Others took the cash. One pointed him toward the direction of the cliffs, where Arvin's shack stood alone. The investigator thanked them, then returned to his boat. He didn't go to the cabin that day. He didn't need to. Not yet. He needed confirmation. Back at the cruiser, he uploaded the photos. One grainy shot, taken from a distance, showed a blurred figure in the doorway of Arvin's shack. It was enough. He made the call. "She's here." Meanwhile, Alina sensed it before Arvin did. A shift in the air, a gaze that lingered too long from the market vendor, whispers that stopped when she walked by. "Someone's looking for me," she said that night, eyes wide with tension. Arvin's jaw clenched. "You sure?" "I feel it." He checked the radio that night, careful not to leave traces. Reports were sparse, but one coded message from the Coast Guard mentioned VIP presence in nearby waters. He didn't need more. They had to prepare. "Tomorrow, you don't leave the shack," he said. "No walks, no market. Understand?" Alina nodded. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed a tin pot on the shelf. "Do you regret it?" "What?" "Saving me." He didn't answer for a long moment. Then softly, "Not once." The next morning, Arvin's gut told him to check the traps early. He left before dawn, slipping down the trail with his pack slung over one shoulder and his eyes sharp for movement. Down at the dock, the trap nets were full. More fish than usual. The sea was changing, and not in ways he liked. As he hauled the crates back toward the shack, he noticed footprints. New ones. 2 sets. Heavy, deliberate. They stopped near his tool shed. One boot print was crushed into the dirt beside a cigarette butt. Expensive foreign brand. He knelt and ran a finger over the indent. Still fresh. When he returned to the shack, Alina was already up. She looked tense, her eyes scanning the windows. "We have to move," he said. "Where?" "There's a cabin up north, old fishing outpost. Not much, but it's hidden." She stood slowly, wrapping a scarf around her head. "They're close, aren't they?" "Yes, That night, Arvin lied for the first time in years. When a man knocked at his door, dark suit, city accent, polite but invasive, Arvin answered with calm ease. "Sorry, no woman here. I live alone." "You sure?" "She'd be injured, dark-haired." "Storm took a few things," Arvin said. "No people." The man looked past him but saw only an empty room. He left 5 minutes later, but Arvin knew it was only a matter of time. As he watched the cruiser pull away, he turned back toward the shack and met Alina's waiting eyes. "We leave at dawn," he said. They left before the sun rose. Arvin led the way, a weathered satchel on his back filled with essentials. Salted fish, a map, water, a compass with a cracked face, and Alina followed close behind, wrapped in a heavy coat that once belonged to his wife. The forest north of Karaya was dense, its trails winding and rarely traveled. It offered cover, silence, a place to disappear. They didn't speak much during the hike. Every crunch of leaves or snap of twigs was followed by a pause, a shared glance, an ear tuned to unnatural sounds. After 3 hours of climbing uneven ground and ducking under moss-draped branches, they reached a bluff overlooking the sea. Nestled against the cliff was a forgotten fishing outpost, a stone cabin with warped shutters, ivy clutching its corners like desperate fingers. Arvin hadn't used it in years. Alina hesitated at the threshold. "Are you sure this is safe?" "Safer than the village," he said, pushing open the stubborn door. Dust swirled inside like spirits waking from slumber. It wasn't much, one room, an old stove and a cot, but it was shelter. She stepped in, rubbing her arms. "Feels like time stopped here." "It did," Arvin muttered, "the day I stopped needing it." By nightfall they had the place cleaned and warmed. Arvin built a fire and Alina unpacked what little they'd brought. They shared a modest meal in the glow of the hearth. Alina studied the cracked compass he'd set beside the map. "This doesn't point north anymore." Arvin gave a wry smile. "Neither do I." She glanced at him, her expression softening. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I know what it's like to be lost," he said. "We just have to keep moving until something feels like home again." She nodded, but deep down they both knew the truth. They weren't running toward anything. They were just trying to stay one step ahead of what was behind. It was during a quiet afternoon that Arvin noticed the mark again. They were sitting on a driftwood bench, watching the tide recede. Alina had rolled up her sleeves, and there it was, a faint circular bruise, shadowed with purple and yellow edges. At first glance it looked like a minor injury, but the shape was too precise, too familiar to anyone who knew control when they saw it. Arvin didn't say anything at first, just stared. Alina noticed. She pulled her sleeve down without a word. "What was it?" he asked gently. "A bracelet," she said, not looking at him. "Tracking device, disguised as jewelry." His hands clenched. "He tracked you?" "Yes," she whispered. "Everywhere. All the time. I smashed it with a rock before I jumped." Arvin inhaled slowly, trying to steady the rising anger. She continued, quieter now. "At first it was subtle, just questions about where I'd been, then controlling my schedule, my clothes, my food, who I saw. It wasn't just about being a wife, it was about being owned." "You're not anymore?" She met his eyes, tears brimming. A part of me still feels like I am. Arvin reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. He branded you with fear, but every day you survive without him, that mark fades. Alina exhaled shakily. I wish I believed that. You will, he said, when the only mark left on you is the one you choose. The cabin became their rhythm. Mornings started with foraging or fishing. Afternoons spent reinforcing the door or boiling water or reading the only 2 books Arvin had brought. Evenings around the fire, wrapped in blankets, sharing bits of themselves like offerings. One evening, after a simple meal, Alina asked the question that had hovered in the air for days. Who was she? Arvin looked at the fire. My wife, her name was Lani. Alina waited. She was a teacher, loved stories, used to write them on scraps of paper and hide them in books, said someday she'd write one of her own. He smiled faintly. She never got the chance. What happened? Pancreatic cancer, fast, vicious. Alina swallowed. I'm sorry. She wanted to travel, Greece, Norway, Alaska, but we never got around to it. Too many bills, too many excuses. You loved her. I still do, but grief, it's like the sea. You think you've learned how to sail through it, and then one wave pulls you under again. Alina was silent, then said, I used to think love was a storybook, a deal. Now I don't even know what it's supposed to be. Arvin looked at her. Maybe it's not something you find. Maybe it's something you build. Quietly. Every day. She leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time since the sea swallowed her, Alina felt warm. It started with a song. Alina didn't know Arvin was outside when she sang it, just a low, soft melody from her childhood, something her mother used to hum while brushing her hair. She hadn't thought of it in years, but that morning while boiling water over the fire, the tune slipped from her lips, like a secret finally ready to be heard. Arvin paused at the door, heart snagging on the sound. It was haunting, raw and gentle, carried on the cold air like the scent of rain. He didn't move, just stood, listening, watching her through the open doorway as she worked, bathed in the pale gold light of morning. He'd forgotten how music could feel like a heartbeat. When she turned and saw him, she froze. You heard that? He gave a small nod. It was beautiful. Alina flushed, embarrassed. Sorry. Habit. No need to be sorry, he said. Don't hide that part of you. They shared a long glance that lingered just a second too long. Then, flustered, she turned back to the fire. Later that day, they went down to the cove to check the traps. Alina's fingers brushed Arvin's as they sorted the haul. Both froze for a moment, but neither pulled away. Something had shifted. Not loud, not suddenly, just real. The first real touch came under the cloak of twilight. They had just finished supper, grilled mackerel and wild greens. Alina was laughing, genuinely laughing, at Arvin's story about a drunken seagull that used to steal his bait fish and hide them in his boots. Her laugh was sunlight in winter. Unexpectedly welcome. As it faded, a comfortable silence fell. The fire crackled. Outside, the sea whispered against the cliffs. Then she reached for the kettle, misjudged the distance, and her fingers brushed against his. They both froze. This time, it wasn't a fleeting brush. It was a pause. A moment. He didn't move. Neither did she. Their hands stayed touching just barely, as if both were trying to memorize the warmth. Slowly, cautiously, she turned her palm to meet his. His fingers curled into hers, tentative but sure. Her heart beat loud in her ears, but she didn't pull away. When their eyes met, it was as if all the words left unsaid suddenly didn't matter. There was no need for them. Their hands spoke more clearly than their mouths ever could. They sat like that for minutes, firelight flickering over their skin, the world reduced to a single silent connection. They didn't kiss, not yet, but they didn't have to. 3 days later, Arvin made the risky decision to return to Karaya for supplies. He didn't like it, but they were low on essentials: fuel, matches, medicine. Alina begged him to let her come, but he refused. Too dangerous, he said. She waited at the cabin, pacing. Back in the village, Arvin kept his head low. His face was familiar to the locals, but he didn't linger, just moved with purpose from stall to stall, a pack of supplies slung over his shoulder. He noticed it almost immediately. He was being watched. A man stood near the old fish smoker, pretending to browse. City boots, clean shave, out of place. Arvin kept calm, moved toward the apothecary, another man across the street, leaning on a post, checking his phone every few seconds. Then the click. He didn't hear it, but he felt it. A camera flash, subtle, silent, from behind a stack of crates. He didn't look, he didn't react, but he knew. They were closing in. He left the market quickly, circling around the docks to throw off any tail. When he reached the boat, he cast off with hands shaking slightly. Back at the cabin, Alina was waiting on the cliff, eyes scanning the water. She ran to him the moment she saw the boat, her relief so visceral it made his chest ache. "They saw me," he said the moment they were inside. "Or at least, someone took a photo." Alina paled. "Then they know I'm with you." Arvin didn't reply. He simply reached for her hand again. Warm, alive, real, but for how long? The photo made its way across encrypted servers in less than 30 minutes. Lucas Margrave sat in a leather chair aboard his private yacht, the Monarch, reviewing the image on a crystal-clear tablet screen. The woman was blurry, caught mid-step, her face partly obscured by wind and shadow. But he knew. He knew it was her. Alina. "She's still on the coast," Lucas muttered. Across from him, his lead operative nodded. "Taken at a market in Karaya village. The man she's with is a local fisherman, Arvin Voss. Lives alone. Former Navy, widowed." Lucas arched a brow. "Military?" "Yes, sir. Tactical experience, known locally as a recluse." Lucas smirked. "Then he's either stupid or sentimental. Either way, I'll rip her from that hovel myself." "Should we engage?" "Not yet," Lucas said. "They're spooked now. They'll run again. I want them to think they've slipped past us. Let them get comfortable. Then strike." He leaned forward, tapping the image until it zoomed into Alina's half-hidden profile. She thought she could disappear into some fishing town, hide behind a man in flannel and a campfire. Lucas chuckled, cold and slow. She forgot who owns her. The knock came just after midnight. Arvin and Alina had been sitting in silence near the hearth, the wind whistling against the weathered cabin walls. She'd fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder, the fire painting orange ribbons across her face. The knock was sharp, precise, no hesitation. Arvin eased her down gently and grabbed the hunting rifle from behind the door. He didn't turn on the porch light. Another knock, then a voice. Polite, dangerous. Evening, sorry to disturb. We're looking for someone, lost at sea, poor thing. You haven't seen anyone unusual, have you? Alina tensed on the floor, eyes wide. Arvin stepped outside. A man in a clean-cut coat stood alone. No badge, no uniform, no flashlight. I'm alone, Arvin said. The man gave a genial smile. That's so. Storm took a few things, but no people. The man scanned the darkened window, then back to Arvin. Well, if you do see anyone, let us know. It's important. She's not well, delusional, might think she's in danger when she isn't. She ain't here, Arvin said firmly. The man's smile twitched. Good night, then. When the stranger left, Arvin didn't move until he heard the car engine fade down the dirt road. Inside, Alina was standing, shaking. They're here, she whispered. I know, he said. They'll be back. The next morning, Arvin rode into Karaya for the last time. He left Alina in the cabin with enough supplies to last a week and strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. The forest was thick enough to hide her from sight. For now, in the village, things felt wrong. The air is still. Eyes followed him. Familiar faces wouldn't meet his gaze. Someone had talked. When he arrived at the dock, two men in dark coats stood near his skiff. Their posture screamed government, but their eyes were on the private sector, ruthless, hungry. Mr. Voss, one said. Yeah. We've been looking into a woman, possibly injured, dark hair, seen around your property. No woman at my place, Arvin replied. Live alone. The men exchanged glances. One pulled out a photo. Recognize her? He didn't flinch, just shook his head. Haven't seen her. Mind if we take a look around? Arvin met their gaze without blinking. My property's posted. You'll need a warrant. They didn't like that, but they didn't push. Not yet. They left with tight smiles and veiled threats. Arvin watched them go, the knot in his chest tightening. Back at the cabin, he found Alina curled in the loft with a blanket, waiting. They were in the village, he said. You're going to need to disappear. Really, disappear. She nodded, voice small. And you? I'll buy you time. They spent the night packing only what could be carried. No papers, no traceable devices, just clothes, food, and a waterproof bag with cash and fuel vouchers Arvin had been saving for years. Alina's hands shook as she folded a sweater. I hate this, she whispered. I know, Arvin said, but we can't stay. She looked at him suddenly. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd never washed ashore? Arvin paused. Every day. I ruined your peace. You gave it meaning. Tears brimmed in her eyes. And now I'm taking it away again. He crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her close. You didn't take anything, he whispered. You gave me back something I thought I'd buried with her. You reminded me how to fight. Their kiss was soft, fierce, final. When dawn came, they moved through the forest to an old inlet Arvin once used for offshore trips. His backup boat, the Heron, still floated there, weathered but seaworthy. Alina climbed in silently. Arvin unmoored the rope. As the boat cut across the water, she turned to look at the cliffs one last time. the place that had saved her, the man who had taught her to breathe again. She didn't know where they were going, but for the first time she didn't feel lost. They reached the small port of Darson under the cover of fog. Darson wasn't even on most maps, a forgotten harbor used mostly by old smugglers and seasonal fishermen. Arvin docked the Heron behind a weathered cannery building hidden from the main slip. They moved quickly, quietly, and without ceremony. Alina wore a hooded jacket now, her face mostly obscured, but her eyes were sharp. She had stopped asking what was next. Now she simply followed. Inside an abandoned boathouse, they settled in for the night. Arvin used an old camping stove to make tea. Alina sat beside a crate, staring at nothing. That was when the knock came. Not on the door, on the window. 3 quick taps. Arvin spun around, rifle in hand. A shadow stood just outside the glass. Alone, hands up. "I'm not here to arrest anyone," the man said through the glass. "I'm here to make a deal." Arvin hesitated, then slowly opened the door. The man stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. His face was thin, angular, the kind of man who smiled like he'd done you a favor before hurting you. "Lucas sent me," he said. "He's offering you a way out." Arvin didn't respond. The man pulled out a small envelope. "Cash, enough to vanish. All you have to do is step aside. Let us take her." Alina went still. "You walk away rich and no one gets hurt," he added. Arvin stared at him, eyes burning. "You don't understand," he said. "I don't walk away." The man's smile thinned. "Then you're choosing poorly." "Maybe, but I'm choosing her." The man tucked the envelope back in his coat and turned to leave. "You've got 24 hours. After that, it's not an offer." By sunrise, word had spread through Darson. Strangers were in town, well-dressed, armed. They asked questions at the local cafe, offered too much money to too many people. It didn't take long before someone gave them a name. Arvin. An old harbor mechanic mentioned the fisherman who'd come in late, kept to himself, and docked at the back slip. By midday, Lucas's men knew exactly where to look. Arvin saw it coming. He always did. From the corner of the boathouse, he watched the harbor crowd shift. Locals moving differently, faces turned away, conversations dying when he walked past. "They're folding," he told Alina. "They sold us out." "Not all, but enough." He scanned the horizon. "We have maybe one more day before they move in fully." Alina looked toward the boat. "Then we go tonight?" "No." He turned to her. "We don't go back to sea, that's what they expect." "Then what?" "We disappear inland, on foot, through the old quarry pass." "It's suicide," she said. "No," he replied. "It's the only way they won't follow. They don't know these paths. I do." That night, under the cover of low clouds and no moon, they left Darson behind. Every step was a betrayal survived. Every breath was a borrowed chance. Hours of hiking brought them to a forgotten lookout on the edge of the cliffs. Below, nestled between 2 rocky coves, lay a barely seaworthy vessel Arvin had stashed years ago during a crabbing run. It had no name, no registration, but it would float. Probably. "We sail from here," Arvin said. 3 hours with good wind, and we'll be out of any range they can reach, by land. Alina nodded, teeth chattering from exhaustion and adrenaline. They worked in silence, loaded the boat. cut the old mooring ropes. Arvin used a length of canvas to cover the hull, disguising it as driftwood from above. They launched just before dawn, slipping through low tides as seabirds called overhead. For a while, the sea was kind, but nothing stayed that way for long. By mid-morning, a long, dark speedboat appeared on the horizon, growing faster, larger, cutting through the ocean like a blade. "They found us," Alina whispered. Arvin turned the rudder hard. The small boat groaned under the strain, waves crashing over the bow. "They're too fast," she said, clutching the railing. "We just need one chance," he muttered. "Hold on." He cut toward a rocky outcrop, a narrow strait between sea stacks. Dangerous, unforgiving. The chase boat hesitated. Arvin didn't. They skimmed through the rocks as a swell crashed behind them, knocking the bigger boat off its pursuit line. For a moment, just one breath, they were alone again. But Alina's voice cut the silence. "Arvin, the rudder!" He looked down. The tiller was cracked. The next wave hit hard. The boat twisted, and everything went white. The water swallowed them. The boat didn't capsize immediately. It spun sideways, slammed against a jagged rock, and split along its starboard seam. Alina screamed as the cold sea yanked her into its chaos. Arvin shouted her name, the sound drowned in the crash of surf and wood breaking like bones. Underwater, all was dark and furious. Alina kicked upward, panic surging until her head burst through the surface. She gasped, eyes wild, scanning for him. "Arvin!" she cried. No answer. Only the echo of waves and the growing thunder of a second engine. Lucas's men closing in. Then he emerged from the water, coughing and dragging a floating crate behind him. "I've got you," Arvin called out. She swam toward him, fighting the current. He pulled her to the crate, both clinging to the remnants of their escape. The chase boat hovered near the outcrop, unable to follow through the narrow passage. They were close enough to see the silhouette of men on board, scanning the water, trying to calculate a safer way around. Arvin used the current to drift toward a natural sea cave, a hollow in the cliffs, barely visible from open water. "This way," he said. Inside, the world dimmed. The cave was small, tight, and slick with moss. But it was a shelter. They collapsed on the rocks inside, panting, soaked to the bone. "Did they see us enter?" Alina asked. "Doesn't matter," Arvin replied. "They won't come through here. It's too shallow." For now, they were safe, but their boat was gone, their supplies list. They had nothing but a storm lantern Arvin had stuffed in a crate and each other. They huddled together for warmth. Alina's teeth chattered. "We can't keep doing this." "I know," Arvin said quietly, but neither of them had any other plan left. They spent 2 days in the cave. There was no choice. The ocean outside was a frothing nightmare, a storm brewing with the kind of rage that didn't leave quickly. Rain pounded the rocks above them, and the sea crept closer with each high tide. By the second morning, they realized they had drifted to an isolated island, one of the uncharted specks that fishermen avoided due to rocky shoals and unpredictable currents. There was no path back to the mainland, no boats in sight, no rescue coming. They foraged what they could: shellfish, rainwater, a few pieces of broken cargo washed up from their destroyed boat. Alina fashioned a windbreak using broken branches and soaked canvas. Arvin kept the lantern dry. They spoke little, each word measured, conserving breath and morale. But at night, when the wind calmed and the fire flickered low, their silence deepened into something more intimate. "I didn't think I'd make it this far," Alina whispered one evening, curled beside him. "You almost didn't," he murmured, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "Every time I think it's over, something pulls me back." "You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong," she said. "I feel like I've been broken into pieces and put back wrong." "You're not broken," Arvin said gently. "You're just still healing." She looked at him then, really looked, and kissed him. It wasn't a desperate kiss. It was slow, sure, filled with a truth neither of them had dared to speak aloud. That night, under the cover of storm clouds and starlight, they didn't make promises. They made love, not to escape the world, but to reclaim it. The next morning the wind had calmed. Arvin stood at the shoreline, scanning the horizon. No sign of pursuers, no boats, just endless gray water stretching into the sky. Alina joined him, wrapping his coat tighter around her shoulders. "Think they've stopped looking?" "No," he said. "Men like Lucas don't stop. They recalculate." She nodded. "Then we have to be smarter." They spent the day preparing. Arvin used debris to craft a signal fire pit, careful to hide it from aerial view unless intentionally lit. Alina searched the inner cliffs and found a freshwater spring. Every hour became a lesson in survival, splitting driftwood, weaving cord from vine, reinforcing their makeshift shelter with palm bark and netting. Alina's hands, once manicured and delicate, were now rough, scarred, capable. Arvin watched her hammer a stick into the sand to anchor their tarp, and something in his chest swelled. "You look like someone who belongs out here," he said. "I feel like someone new," she replied. They shared a quiet lunch of roasted clams and boiled roots. It wasn't glamorous, but it was nourishing. Real. Afterward, Alina dug out a piece of charcoal from the fire and found a flat shell. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Writing," she said. "To myself." She etched slowly, "To the woman I used to be. You survived. You ran. You fought. And you found love, not in wealth or power, but in the arms of a man with nothing but courage." She cast the shell into the waves, a message for the sea, and maybe one day for someone else like her. The morning sun broke through the cloud cover, casting pale light over the makeshift camp. The sea was calm for the first time in days, its surface like glass, glittering in the dawn. Alina walked barefoot along the shoreline, the hem of Arvin's coat trailing behind her. Her eyes were searching for something, anything that could help them leave, or help someone find them. That's when she saw it, a bottle half buried in the sand. It was old, its green glass weathered and cork intact. Inside, a crumpled piece of paper waited. Arvin came to her side, eyebrows raised as she held it up. "Weird what the ocean gives back," he said. She nodded slowly. "Then maybe it'll take something too." Later that morning she sat by the fire and began to write, a single sheet of paper from Arvin's journal torn carefully, folded into fourths. "To the next woman who's scared to run, do it. Your freedom is worth the fear. I gave up everything, money, family, safety, to escape a man who wanted to own me. I thought I would die, but I found something else instead. A man who asked for nothing and gave me everything. If this reaches you, know that you're not alone. Keep going. Keep fighting. She added no names, no locations, just truth. Arvin watched her tuck it into the bottle and seal it with melted wax from a stub of candle. You think it'll find someone? He asked. She gave a sad smile. Maybe. Or maybe it just needed to be said. She walked to the edge of the rocks and hurled the bottle into the open sea. It arced through the air like a star before vanishing beneath the waves. Sometimes a message is a prayer disguised as a story. They were collecting firewood when they heard it, the low hum of a diesel engine across the water. Arvin dropped the bundle in his arms. That's not Lucas's boat. That engine's commercial. Alina ran with him to the cliff's edge. In the distance, a rusted cargo trawler chugged along the horizon, slow but steady. Could be supply route, Arvin muttered. If we don't signal now, they'll pass by. But if it's the wrong people, he looked at her. We take the risk. We're out of food by tomorrow. No fresh meat since the last storm. They moved quickly. Arvin lit the signal fire they had prepared, a mound of green palm fronds and driftwood stacked into a rough tower. Black smoke began curling into the sky. 10 agonizing minutes passed, then 15. The boat didn't change course. Alina's hope began to flicker. Then she saw it. Movement. The boat angled just slightly, veering toward them. Arvin grabbed his old flare gun and fired into the sky. A burst of red lit the air. By nightfall, a lifeboat was lowered onto the surf. 2 men in coveralls came ashore. They weren't Lucas's men. They were real, human. Found your fire, one of them said, surprised to see the couple. Alina couldn't speak. She burst into tears. The crew took them aboard, fed them canned soup, and wrapped them in wool blankets. They were headed for the mainland, Port Mila, 3 hours south of where the chase had begun. On the trawler deck that night, Arvin held Alina's hand tightly. It's almost over. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Then why does it feel like the hardest part is still ahead? Because it was. Port Mila looked like salvation. Small buildings, paved roads, people who didn't know their names. But the moment they stepped onto land, Arvin felt it in his bones. They were being watched. The cafe they entered was too quiet. The server who poured Alina's coffee didn't look her in the eye. A man with a news tablet had the volume low, but the broadcast was unmistakable. Lucas Margrave has publicly vowed to retrieve his missing fiancée, Alina Devereaux, who reportedly disappeared during her wedding cruise 2 weeks ago. They weren't safe, and they had walked right into the lion's den. Later that afternoon, Alina stepped outside for air and was grabbed by 2 men in tailored suits. "Don't scream," one hissed. "He just wants to talk." They threw a bag over her head and dragged her into a black SUV. When the blindfold was ripped away, she sat across from him. Lucas, he was calm, impeccably dressed, the same cold fire in his eyes. "You've embarrassed me," he said, sipping from a glass of scotch. "But I'm feeling generous today." Alina didn't speak. He smiled. "You marry me, quietly. We hold a reunion ceremony for the press. I forgive your little tantrum and your fisherman walks away untouched. You refuse." His smile twisted. Arvin disappears. Car crash, overdose, fishing accident. Take your pick. Alina's mouth was dry. "You'd kill him?" Lucas leaned forward. No, darling, I'd erase him. That's different. She clenched her fists. And if I say yes? Then we all win. You return to your rightful place, and your little pet gets to live out his days in peace. He slid a phone across the table. Call him. Tell him goodbye. Alina stared at it. She had 24 hours to decide, and no matter what she chose, someone would lose. The Margrave estate was lit like a fairy tale. Journalists swarmed the grounds. Cameras flashed. VIPs clinked champagne glasses under white canopies as string musicians played soft, romantic music. Every detail had been orchestrated for the perfect redemption narrative. The runaway bride finally returned to her place. Lucas stood at the altar beneath a sea of orchids, radiating confidence. Every corner was locked down, every security angle covered. It was, by design, the moment Alina would publicly surrender. But Lucas had underestimated one thing. Alina wasn't the same woman he tried to marry. She emerged from the mansion in a designer gown, new, minimalist, sleeveless, and white, but her eyes burned with resolve. The crowd gasped as she walked down the aisle alone. Lucas extended his hand. She didn't take it. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said loudly, grabbing the microphone before the officiant could begin. "Before this ceremony continues, I have something to say." Lucas's jaw tensed. "Alina, don't." "I was never lost," she continued. "I ran. Because I was being sold like property to a man who sees power as possession." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporters leaned in. "Lucas Margrave paid my father to secure me as part of a corporate deal. He threatened my life, the life of someone I love, and he sent armed men after me when I tried to escape." The security team stepped forward, but the live stream had already begun, broadcast across 3 media networks. Alina smiled bitterly. "Go ahead, Lucas, have me removed. Prove me right." Lucas froze, all his power exposed, dismantled in under 2 minutes. Someone from the press shouted, "Do you have proof?" Alina pulled out a small flash drive from her bodice. Every threat, every recording, every message. By the time she walked off the altar, Lucas was no longer a fiancé. He was a criminal under investigation. 2 days later, Arvin stood on a coastal bluff outside Port Mila, the wind catching his jacket as he watched the horizon. He hadn't heard from her, not since the morning she was taken, not since he almost died trying to find her. He thought about going back to Karaya. He thought about staying, but mostly he thought about her. A voice behind him broke the silence. "You always did have a thing for the sea." He turned. Alina stood there, no guards, no gowns, just jeans, boots, and the fire in her eyes. "I told you to run," he said. "I did," she replied, "but not away from you." He stared, stunned. She stepped forward. "Lucas is finished. The evidence is everywhere. International media picked it up. And my father's company. He stepped down this morning, said he never wanted to lose a daughter again." Arvin's voice was barely a whisper. "So it's over." She smiled. "It's just beginning." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle, green glass with melted wax. It had washed back ashore near the docks. Her message returned. "Maybe it was fate," she said. "Maybe the sea just wanted me to know I wasn't done yet." He took her hand. "I'm glad you came back." "I didn't come back," she whispered. "I came home." Karaya looked different under sunlight. not because it had changed, but because they had. Alina walked along the familiar docks with Arvin hand in hand, as Fisherman nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Word had spread, not the full story, but enough. She had faced power and survived. That made her one of them. They returned to Arvin's cabin first, the same hearth, the same wooden table. But now there were 2 coats on the hook, 2 mugs, 2 lives interwoven by storm and choice. Alina rebuilt parts of the cabin, replacing the old curtains with light fabric, adding small vases of wildflowers to the windowsills. She cooked her first full meal in weeks and insisted on serving it with ceremony. Arvin offered no resistance. They talked about simple things, fish seasons, rain patterns, whether or not to buy a second boat. At sunset, they walked the shoreline in silence. "I want to stay," she said, "for real, not hiding, just living." Arvin looked at her with quiet awe. "Then stay." They sat in the sand as the tide lapped gently at their feet. No past, no threats. Just waves, just them. 1 year later, the villagers gathered for the wedding, not the one that made headlines, but the one that mattered. Alina wore a simple blue dress. Arvin wore his best flannel. The altar was built from driftwood and sea glass. The bouquet was wild flowers from the cliffside. The only witnesses were the people who mattered. There were no photographers, no journalists, no orchestras, just vows, real ones. When Alina said, "I do," it was with no hesitation. When Arvin kissed her, it was with the certainty of a man who had seen life at its harshest and chosen love anyway. After the ceremony, they danced under open sky to the sound of gulls and a distant radio playing blues. Later that night, they stood together on the dock. "You know," Alina whispered, "I still think about that night, when I fell into the sea." Arvin pulled her close. "That wasn't the night you fell." She looked up at him. "That was the night you were pulled back up." And from that day forward, the lonely fisherman was never lonely again. Not because he'd found someone, but because they'd found each other and chosen to stay.